All right, I'm letting people in. Hi, everybody. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. I'm going to wait for more people to join the call, and then we'll get started with the guest lecture. All right, I think that might be everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's guest lecture. Thank you for joining us. If you could please keep yourselves muted throughout the entire presentation till the end. You can leave your questions. If you could please leave your questions in the chat box down below or leave them till the end. We will get to them once the talk is over. Our speaker will be happy to address them at the end of the program. And if you are joining us over Facebook Live, we welcome you as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using the comment section on Facebook. We will be monitoring those comments over Facebook and answering those at the end of the program as well. If you could please note that the talk is being recorded and streamed live, and it'll be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. You can rewatch this talk or previous talks and tours on our YouTube or Facebook pages. And to our people that have joined in, please keep yourselves muted till the end of the talk. You can leave questions or comments in the chat below or keep them till the end. And our speaker, Dr. Florence Gillman, will be happy to answer them at the end of the talk. Dr. Gillman is a professor of biblical studies at USD and a docent at the Timken. And she is very excited to give you this talk today. I will hand it over to Florence. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Taylor. So good morning, everybody. I see some familiar faces and some people I have not yet met. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning and a pleasure to talk about a very interesting subject. So this subject is occasioned by the gift of the wonderful painting by the artist Ferris, Pell, the painting of Salomé. So this talk is inspired by what I have written in the past about her and other women who can be grouped together with her as a group from who we might call biblical femme fatales. So this is a very interesting, fun subject. It's much too huge for one lecture, so I will somewhat limit it today as I go along and possibly do an additional lecture or two on the same subject in the future. So what are femme fatales? The French phrase we translate as deadly women. So these are women who use their beauty or their powers of seduction to control men in some way that leads them to a scandalous ruin or death. There are femme fatales in the news frequently, even these days, of course. Many of them function as spies and as people who trick men into doing something that is being filmed that will ruin their careers and things like that. In the ancient world, the biblical world, which is kind of where I live and roam around, femme fatales were women who found a way to have some power over men in ways that society never would have allowed them otherwise, because women's power was so curtailed. So generally, femme fatales operate with a deadly secret agenda. The men involved with them, maybe even the women around them, don't necessarily know what their goal is. Now, as you look at literature in general, some femme fatales have been goddesses, of course, who have led men to shipwrecks and so on, jump off cliffs and things like that. Some, of course, are mortals. The ones we're going to talk about today are real characters in the Bible, although, as we will see, they may have been fictionally created in stories that ancient people told that have made their way into the Bible. So men have fought over such women, died for them, and lived, if they lived, to deeply regret the power that a femme fatale has over them to make them fight or die. The survivors, looking back, the various men blame the femme fatale, of course, and raise questions. Was she real? Was she a demon? Was she a witch? Who was she? So this is our subject today, women who endanger men, but specifically today, I'm working on women who endanger men's heads. Okay, so the art we're going to look at today is all about women who defeat men for good or evil. All right, some of them are operating with motives, ulterior motives, doing good for their people, and others are operating out of evil motives. So we will see a difference in how these women use their power. And we will focus on four women, actually. All of these women went after men's heads. It wasn't enough to just kill them, but they had to go after their heads. Jane, I see you laughing, and that's how I feel too. This is a very interesting bunch of women. Now, when I told my daughter I was working on femme fatales and in the Bible and so on, she said, well, you should play the song Man-Eater. And I have to say, I did not know the song Man-Eater, but it's a contemporary version of a femme fatale, a man-eater. And I would play you the song now that I've heard it myself, except that probably I couldn't do that for copyright reasons, right? So I'll tell you about it and you can play it later. So this is a 1982 #1 hit by Daryl Hall and John Oates. And it centers on New York City in the 1980s. So when you listen to the song, and if you've ever spent any serious time in New York City, this really just comes alive. It's really an interesting song. And one of the great lines in it is, watch out, boy, she'll chew you up. She's a man-eater. So this is a contemporary slant on femme fatale. So treat yourself to this song. I'm sure you can just find it on Amazon or anyway, when you Google it. Okay, the ones we're going to look at today are these people on the left. So understand, I'm only doing 3 of the biblical femme fatales, and there's many more that we could do. All right, so on the left, we're going to do Salomé and Herodias. They're a team who defeat John the Baptist, as you see on the right. He's their victim. And this, of course, is inspired by the Timken's painting of Salomé. By the way, we can call her Salomé or Salomé with an accent on the E. Salomé, the French. I tend to call her Salomé, but you can call her either. All right, the second one we're going to look at is the famous Judith of the book of Judith. And her victim was a General Holofernes. The third one we're going to look at is, you can say her name Jael or Yael, and she is also in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and she killed the General Sisera. So all these victims got beheaded. That's what creates this little club of beheaded men, victims of femme fatales. As I said, I was inspired by the Timken's wonderful new Salomé by Ella Ferris Pell. So if you haven't already seen this in the museum, treat yourself, first of all, and think about what Ella Ferris Pell was trying to say with this painting. So we see Salomé as a dancing girl. She's holding a platter, the English term, the British term for which is a charger, and is actually the more famous term for what she's holding. And we see her, I would say, we could discuss this later, but I would say it's after the dance because of a number of things. First of all, she's kind of disheveled. The bodice of her dancing gown is falling down, and she's holding the charger. And in the story, as we'll see, the charger comes in after the dance in negotiations with her stepfather to have John the Baptist beheaded. So I would say the moment, I like to use this term when I talk about paintings, the moment the artist chose is the end of the dance and right before they implement the beheading of John. She has the charger and she's ready to make the demand to have his head sent to her. That's my interpretation of the moment of the painting so far. In any case, you may, in other lectures that you've heard about, including this picture, and there have been numerous lectures that you may want to go back to on the Timken site to get more information about this painting, but you may have heard quite a bit about the artist. Let me just remind you a couple things about her. So this is a recent gift by the Dijkstra's to the museum, and it's inspired a lot of interesting discussion. And in the history of art, Salomé is very important. She is in many, many great paintings, along with her mother and such other femme fatales that we're going to talk about as Judith and Jael. So as I said, these four are a little group in that they went for men's heads. So that's been very fascinating to artists. Sometimes the fascination is the fury of the woman that can be demonstrated. And also sometimes, although not as much as you will see, it's interesting to try to portray what the neck looks like after the head has been taken off of it. So we realize, of course, that in the history of art, there is a parallel with the history of anatomy and understanding anatomy. And sometimes artists are trying to demonstrate how much anatomy they actually know. And sometimes they demonstrate that they don't know anatomy, or sometimes they demonstrate that they're not interested in anatomy, and then they just make the severed head, the throat that's left gushing one long stream of blood. Okay, well, you can look for that. That's kind of fun to look for too. Now, the thing is, when you have a group of paintings about beheading men, there has been confusion about, hey, wait, which one of these women is being portrayed? And if you see a sign in the museum that it says it's Salomé, or if it's a Judith or Jael, okay, the museum has helped us, but the museum, it depends on the art historians, and sometimes art historians, along with the public, are not absolutely certain if the history of who was being painted was not clear coming from the time of the artist. So it can be a little confusing, and that's why it's interesting to know the attributes. And that's what really is the goal of this talk today. What are the attributes to look for when you see a figure beheaded, and which biblical character did it? So it's the attributes we're kind of looking at especially. So we're going to compare their stories, and I call them an ominously successful sisterhood. Well, just a bit about Ella herself. You may have heard this in other lectures, so I'm going through it very quickly. As you can see, the dates of her life. So she's a mid-19th century to early 20th century American painter. This is a painting that appeared in a newspaper article about her. That's why the quality of it is not great, but at least you get some idea of her. And so this is a self-portrait she painted. Jane Hughes was a person who collected a lot of information about her. And this is near the end of her life when she paints herself as sketching at her home in Beacon, New York. Beacon is north of the city on the, what would it be? It would be the east side of the river across from Newburgh, New York. And I'll tell you in a minute how she ended up there. Just quickly to give a chronology of her life. She was born in St. Louis, and she studied at the Cooper Union in New York. So she was given a very serious art education. And when she graduated in 1870, her great creation was Puck. So Puck is the mischievous sprite from A Midsummer Night's Dream. If you saw that recently at the Old Globe at the festival stage, if you saw Midsummer Night's Dream, you saw a wonderful, wonderful performance of Puck. Anyway, the New York Post praised her Puck, and this launched her career, and that was 1870. By 1889, she was already exhibiting in Paris at the Salon. And she was in the 1890s, and she was living in New York City, and summering in the Catskills became the tradition for many people. I have wandered around the Catskills in the summer, being a upstate New Yorker, and there are many old hotels. There's still a few left where people from the city came to cool down, and the hotels were kind of organized ethnically. So if you were Irish, there were certain ones you went to, and if you were Jewish, there were certain ones you went to, and activities were really ethnic also. And I just loved going around to those places and checking it out. In the 60s, when I had a chance to do that, there's some vestiges of those hotels left, and of that whole New York spirit of going to the Catskills. I mean, now people are not going to go to the Catskills in the same way. They're going to fly to Bermuda or something, right? But anyway, this is all part of her history, and if you're a New Yorker or spent time, you know all about this. She died in Beacon in 1922, and amazingly or sadly, we don't know the whole story. She was buried in the nearby Fishkill Rural Cemetery near her sister in an unmarked grave. So we don't know how this wonderful artist who achieved so much and was recognized, and at the same time died apparently a rather impoverished death. Anyway, what we are, so we don't know. What we are lucky is that her uncle William Ferris Pell had bought the ruins of Fort Ticonderoga in 1820. So it was a family, it was like a place where the whole family would gather to vacation. So if you've been to Fort Ticonderoga in New York, it's a very interesting place that functioned in the Revolutionary War. It's sort of like a big, huge concrete star in many ways. He had a lot of interesting rooms in it that William Ferris Pell developed into a family vacation spot. Anyway, luckily, when she died, most of her paintings went to Fort Ticonderoga, and they function now in the museum there as part of the huge museum of the Revolutionary War and how Fort Ticonderoga functioned at that time. So, but we, the Timken, I'm speaking for, we have Salomé. Now, as I say, there's been a lot of attention, and Dr. Derek Cartwright has written some very interesting comments on the Timken website. And he says that this is the most famous painting of her career. So again, we are very lucky to have this. And you could, as you are reading this while I'm talking, he also points out that the Timken is lucky that this is the first work by a female artist to go into the Timken collection. So it does, as he says, reflect the challenges that female artists put up with or had to surmount in the latter part of the 19th century. So it's a wonderful thing, as he says, that Sandy and Bram Dijkstra gave this painting to the Timken. So he tells you more about it. You could read this on the Timken website, and I will move on and pointing this out to you. And please go back to the Timken's general website and look at just at Salomé, and you can see his interesting comments. He put these comments in there as one of his Art of the Week series. Okay, now the story. We're going to review the story quickly, and we will do that for each of the three female beheaders, or four actually. As you see, we start out with a team. So the team here is Salomé and her mother, Herodias. And these are historical characters. They really existed. They are known outside the New Testament in the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus. So we have, you might say, double sources from which to draw information about these women. The main story of what happened in terms of their beheading of John the Baptist is found in the New Testament. The earliest version of it is in the Gospel of Mark, and then a slightly edited version, changing some significant facts, is in the Gospel of Matthew. Interestingly, if you know that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are related, you will notice that Luke, basically, we're having a transition in this room. You can see that. The writer Luke leaves out the story. These women did not fit his agenda, and that's very interesting to speculate about, because he does seem to be a little scared of powerful women, not because they're bad, but because he's afraid other women, good women, might learn to be powerful themselves also. So he doesn't want to spread any techniques, apparently. That's a theory. Okay, you can see that I put down here in the lower left corner a picture of the book I wrote about these people. It is not a book about art history. This is, as I as Taylor said at the beginning, I'm a longtime professor of biblical studies. So this is a study of the texts, but it is also a feminist approach. And so if you are interested in those things, that's what this type of book addresses. So it also requires then a look at a lot of history and archaeology, a study of Josephus as well as the Gospels and so on. So we're dealing with real people. That doesn't mean that the story hasn't been manipulated, okay? So, and edited in various ways. But effectively, what's going on in the story is illustrated by much art. Now, I'm going to start with this painting from 1385 because it really basically tells the story. And it's an easy way to get into the story. You see that this painting by Aretino has two parts. In itself, it is the left side of a triptych. So I don't know if anybody has researched and knows where the other two parts of the triptych are, a triptych being a three-part structure. But this anyway is the left side. And in itself, it is bifurcated, so it has two parts. So you can see that in 1385, the artist who shows the beheading of John the Baptist does not know much anatomy, where you see what's left of John's body. Okay, basically the story involves the characters on the left. And this cuts the story right down to the very simple lines of it. So let's see who we see here. We see a king. His name is Antipas, Herod Antipas, or just Antipas. The supposed queen, in fact, neither were king nor queen actually, historically. But the queen in the picture, is Herodias, his second wife, and he is her second husband, and that is part of the issue in the painting. We see some other courtiers here. These two, they are not named figures. And we see the daughter of Herodias right here, Salomé. So to tell you the story quickly, and you could read it in Mark or Matthew also, to tell you the story quickly, the wife, Herodias, is furious at John the Baptist, who was preaching in Galilee, where Antipas was the tetrarch. That was his title. So he's the highest political figure, but he's under the Romans. So John the Baptist was preaching that their marriage was illegitimate because, now get it straight, because people think it's because the issue was divorce. It wasn't about divorce at all. Divorce was practiced by Romans and by the Jewish people. The issue was that she had been married to his brother. And that, in a different way from what modern people think, was an equivalent of, for her then to marry her former husband's brother was an issue of incest. Since in their understanding, very different from us, when she married her first husband, she literally became part of his family lineage. So we don't think that way at all. But I don't think, maybe people in some places in the world do think that way. I'm not aware of it. But in any case, therefore, if she marries his brother, she is committing incest. It's a sister-brother marriage. So John the Baptist was crying out, as he was preaching about many things, he was crying out that this was an illegitimate marriage. And it infuriated her. It scared him, according to the historian Josephus. John in general scared him because John was drawing a lot of crowds of people, and this was politically scary to Antipas. So Antipas was happy to keep him quiet, but Herodias wanted John killed. So she needed to find a way to make Antipas do it, have it order it done. And John was in prison, and was in prison apparently nearby where they were. The historian Josephus tells us it's in a place called Machaerus. I think I put a picture here to show you. Yeah, here it is. You see this high fortress up here? It's in the country. Today it's part of Jordan. Okay, so this is where the story, according to Josephus, takes place. So they're there, they're having a great time, celebrating with friends, and Herodias sees a way to get him to kill John, and that is by using her daughter, Salomé. We do not know for sure how old Salomé was, but she was capable of dancing very well. And most of all, the suggestion seems to be that this was a dance that was rather erotic. Certainly, Ella Francis Powell's painting paints her as a dancer capable of being erotic. And the impact this had on Antipas was that he was so taken, perhaps also heavily drunk, that he told her he would give her anything in the world. What does she want? He said, even half my kingdom, which was ridiculous because he only ruled because the Romans let him rule. He couldn't give away half his kingdom. But that kind of shows, as we might say today, that he was in his cups. Yes? So Salomé consulted with her mother. What shall I ask him for? What shall I ask him for? We don't know. Shall I ask him for a huge string of pearls? What shall I ask him for? And her mother saw a way to exercise power, precisely saying, ask him for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Bring it to me on a platter. So he did. She asked him, and according to the story, he was unable to deny it because of the presence of other courtiers. So you see why the artist has put these other people in here. They're very key to the story because he's embarrassed. He can't back down on what he said he would do because others were witnessing. So he felt like he had to go through with this. Josephus says he was really scared. He was very scared of the integrity of the power of John the Baptist. But he went ahead and ordered the slaying. So this is also important when we're going to look at attributes, because he orders John to be killed in the prison, not by the women. Okay, the women don't do the killing. The killing is done by one of his prison guards, apparently. And the head then is brought on a platter, on a charger, to Herodias. So who's the killer here? Well, Herodias, but Salomé cooperates, right? But neither one of them actually wield the weapon. Okay, keep that in mind when we keep talking about attributes. So here's Luini's painting of Salomé receiving the head of John the Baptist, and you see the plate, the charger. And the reason we keep using the word charger is, as you can see in this quote, in the King James Version, which is the most famous English version historically, okay, that people don't even know that they're learning biblical words from the King James Version. It has so pervaded English. And so anyway, and his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel. We don't even use the words damsel and charger anymore, but they're the famous words. And okay, so the head is brought to Salomé, and then she takes it to her mother. I like this painting because it tells a lot about the story, and it shows a lot of the characters. So this is Rubens, and this is the moment when Salomé brings the head on the charger, as you see, to Herodias. Now look at these figures, okay? Look especially at, so the idea, of course, is that there's a lot of people here witnessing this because he had to carry out his offer to her because all these people were present. But look at these characters right here. So here's Herodias. Here's apparently a maidservant of hers, and here's Herod. Now, I zeroed in on this in detail, and it's really interesting because apparently when you're close up and under good photography, you see she has a pleasant look on her face. All right, she has accomplished what she wanted to happen. But look at her maidservant. She looks kind of happy for her, doesn't she? Isn't that strange? Anyway, but look at Herod. Okay, Herod Antipas, I think, I don't know what you think, but I think Rubens has made him have a gaze that looks like, oh no, what have I done? What is going to happen now? So this is a highly detailed, high number of pixel content of the same painting. And there you can look at the maidservant again. She looks quite pleased at what her mistress has accomplished. So that's how Rubens has interpreted the women, but then look at Herod. Okay, so moving on then, we see De La Roche in the middle 19th century, he's painted Herodias and Salomé. Here you see a very different approach, but you can see I think you can see what do I want to say, the crass satisfaction perhaps in the face of Herodias. And Salomé here, what was her attitude? She was certainly under the power of her mother. She certainly did what her mother wanted, right? What is a bit unusual here is this is the moment after Salomé has given the head in the charger to Herodias. Herodias has him now. She has his head where she wants it on a charger in her hands. By the way, I've only picked a couple pictures to illustrate some of these points. There are dozens, I think, of pictures we could be looking at. It's also important to keep in mind when you're talking about Salomé and Herodias and John the Baptist's head, that they did not do the killing. They did not do the dirty work. So there are many pictures also, such as this one by Caravaggio, showing the actual execution scene. So, and there's the charger again, waiting to take his head to Salomé and Herodias. So they don't do the killing. They do not hold a weapon in pictures when we're looking at the attributes. Okay, I already showed you this then. This is historically where it is. Josephus says it happened. This is the actual palace, the Herodian palace that has been more recently excavated. It is interesting archaeologically related to the story in that there was a special dining room for women, apparently, apart from the main dining room, which is how the story portrays it too, that Herodias and Salomé are in another room waiting after her dance and deciding what to do about John. I think this is kind of interesting too, because, there's always this big question that I put in the previous slide, where is John's head now? And I think, well, we don't know the rest of the story. She receives the head on a charger. So what did she do with it? If you ask me, I think she threw it down the hill and let the goats and sheep eat it. I call it, that she went bowling with the head of John the Baptist. But the history of John the Baptist, the stories about John the Baptist, places his head all over Europe in many Christian churches where the remains of martyrs were valued. So there's a lot of competition about who has the real head. I don't think it matters to a lot of modern people, but it's kind of fun to check it out and see what people say. I think she probably got rid of it. Anyway, we move now to the second female femme fatale, and this is Judith. Her story is in the book of Judith, It's a story that probably was written in around 100 BC. And it mentions so many historical figures from the previous 500 years. And it's a mishmash. So it's not consistent with who's who and who interacted with who and so on. So it is by a knowledgeable author in one sense. The person knows a lot of stories from the history, but has mixed them up very much. So it refers to 5 centuries of historical and geographical information, and even has some imaginary details. So we think it's more like a historical novel than a real text. It may, some of the things about some people may be factual, but the whole thing as a whole is sort of like a historical novel, or as I say here, historical fiction. But the point of the story is to point out that God ultimately delivers Israel throughout its history, and in particular in this period, and that the instruments God used can be as minor as a simple widow. And that's who Judith is. She's a simple widow. Now, this is a well-known story, but and based on her name, which is, it's a feminine form of Judah. So Yehudi. The oldest version we have is in Greek. In the Greek version of the Old and New Testament, the Septuagint, from the late 300s and later. Now, as people look at this book, it is called deuterocanonical from the Catholic and Orthodox perspective. That means secondarily canonical. It means Catholics and Orthodox know there's some, what do I want to say, some secondary characteristic to this book as far as having it in the canon. And for Protestants and Jews, it's in the Apocrypha. So there are 7 books and numerous passages that Protestant groups and Jewish groups consider to be definitely, no doubt, Jewish literature, but not in the canon. Okay, so what's the end result? We all study it. We all read it. We all study it. Catholics and Orthodox consider it sort of secondary, but it's in the canon. Why? Because Jerome in the 300s held that it was canonical. He put it in the Latin Vulgate. Clement of Rome, writing his document called 1 Clement in the late 1st century, referred to it. And therefore, for the Christian side of things, the Catholic Orthodox side of things, Judith was just as significant in Christian art as other scriptural women. But keep in mind, we all study it. And probably the name Judith is more popular among Jewish people than many other names. So she is a very important figure. So the story is in the book of Judith, chapters 10 through 14. That's a long story in the Bible if you got four plus chapters of attention. So Holofernes was an Assyrian general. So this would be the period when the Assyrians are attacking the northern kingdom and about to destroy a town called Bethulia. We don't even know where that was, nor can we excavate it now because we don't know. Maybe it was a fictional town, maybe not. The way the story goes, Judith was a beautiful young widow, and she managed to get near Holofernes, and with her beauty, he was very interested in her, and that got her into his tent. So he apparently intended to have sexual relations with her, and he tried to get her drunk, and I don't know how she managed, but she managed to let him get drunker, and he passed out. So as when he was passed out, then she decapitated him with a sword. So there had been a plan to do this because she had a servant with her waiting outside who just happened to have a bag ready to take his head away. So we can see there was planning here. She knew what she was doing, and she was doing it on behalf of her people. She was defeating the invading Assyrian general. There are many famous lines in this story, but one is, "I swear that it was my face that seduced Holofernes to his ruin, and that he did not sin with me to my defilement nor disgrace." So she's saying that she was able to prevent him from raping her. But it was her, this is a famous line. It's quoted a lot of places. "I swear that it was my face that seduced him." Okay, anyway, she's successful. And the art depicting this likes to show the decapitated Holofernes. It wants to show Judith holding the sword or carrying his head. It almost always shows the servant with a bag waiting to bag the head or containing the head. And a very few paintings, mostly Northern European, and we don't know why, put in a platter, a charger, like in the paintings of Herodias and Salomé, to receive the head instead of the bag. So this, you can see, this is where confusion can come in. The clue is always that Judith has a female servant and usually has the sword. So the attributes you're really looking for to know it's Judith are especially the sword, and the bag for the head, and the female servant. So, and by the way, many times the servant is an older lady. It's usually not difficult to decide if the person looks like a servant or not. Okay, so let's look at a couple. So here's Cranach the Elder's Judith victorious. And here you see the attribute is the sword. She does not look like she just cut off somebody's head. She's not covered with blood. She's an elegant 16th century English lady, probably. And this artist is also not too interested in anatomy, as you can see, based on Holofernes' neck. So anyway, very clearly Judith with the sword. Here's another one. Okay, whoops. And here we have on, I think, is this Artemisia? I'm not seeing my own screen here, right? Whoops. This is Artemisia, right? Can you see at the top?
It's Caravaggio.
Oh, this was the Caravaggio. Thank you. I can't see my own top screen at the top. All right, so yeah, Caravaggio's use of chiaroscuro is so gorgeous in this painting, isn't it? But remember, we're not really talking about the techniques of art here so much as the attributes which we have to focus on. So here you see the beautiful woman, obviously the old wizened servant who's had a hard life as a servant probably, and the bag. See the bag? And then, of course, the sword. You can tell it's a sword. The hilt is in her hand, and you can see the rest of the sword over here. What I think is great about Caravaggio's is the man is resisting, okay, in the sense of he's crying out. So many of the paintings of beheaded men look like they're quite placid, quite peaceful. Again, no attempt at neck anatomy here. Yes, okay, so now we've got, here's Artemisia's, and here again, we see the sword, the hilt in her hand. This servant seems a younger, more contemporary of hers. And here we see no attempt at anatomy, of course, and here we see a grimace on his face, I believe. This one's pretty interesting because of Artemisia's own biography, which I'm sure many of you know, which is very fascinating. This one is, so hers is 1614 to 1618 probably, but notice that her father then painted after her, painted the same scene. I'm sure there's plenty of history, I don't know it offhand, about who commissioned these or why, and where they were first installed. But here you see his is a much more placid presentation of two beautiful young women. John the Baptist, or Holofernes' head is very placid. Again, there's just no doubt who it is because of the sword. Okay. All right. So we've looked at two different beheadings. So we looked at Herodias and Salomé, and we looked at Judith beheading Holofernes. This painting has been confused by these characters. So it's a painting by Titian, and people have argued in art history, is this Judith? So, okay, she's got the head of Holofernes. She has it on a platter, which would argue more strongly for a Salomé, but yeah, there's a few pictures of Judith with a platter. Is this the servant who helped her? That's one argument for Judith. But is it Salomé? Well, arguing for Salomé is she looks a bit disheveled, as if she had been dancing. Her hair is a bit disheveled, some art historians point out. Is this the servant who brought her the head on a platter, the charger? Is it Salomé? Some have even argued it's Herodias, her mother, receiving the platter from Salomé. That's the hardest one to argue, I think, because she doesn't look too satisfied. She looks rather passive or pensive. Who do you think won? It's seen as Titian. So today, at least from what I have seen in research, is that the most art historians who have studied it really think it's Salomé with the head of John the Baptist. But you can see how you could argue this in a number of different ways, and the attributes are, in a way, not strong enough here. All right, moving on now to Jael and Sisera. And this story comes from the book of Judges. So as I said, you can call her Jael or Jael. I think this name, interestingly, based on the students I've known in the past few years, this name is quite popular. And this concerns the 12th century. So this is the period when after the Israelites have escaped from Egypt, and they wandered in the desert for 40 years, and now they're moving into Canaan from the east. So this would be roughly the 1100s BC. And there's many interesting stories about the judges. So the judges are ad hoc leaders. They arise when they're needed, and then they melt back into the population after the struggle is over. The story is actually written down probably in about 550 in Babylon during the Babylonian exile, but it may have functioned in oral tradition for many years before that, many centuries. So as I said, judges are charismatic leaders. They arise when you need them, and then once the battle is won, they return literally to farming, to the plow. So this story is a subset of the stories of the famous judge Deborah. So Jael is not a judge. Deborah is the judge. and Jael's in the same period, one of the people associated with Deborah. So Deborah was leading the Israelites fighting a Canaanite king named Jabin in Hatzor, which is a real place that's been very well excavated. So he supposedly had a lot of weaponry. He supposedly had 900 chariots and had great control over the Israelites moving into the land for at least 20 years. So he was a force to be reckoned with. So the king then, Jabin, keep him in mind. He is not the victim, however. His general was Sisera, and Sisera is the victim in this story. So Deborah has a general named Barak. So maybe you've heard there's many stories of Deborah and Barak. And Barak was attacking Sisera. And at one point, he is so overwhelmed with the power of the Canaanites that he tells Deborah she needs to go with the army because of her authority, because of her relationship to Yahweh, to God. Deborah tells him to attack, and he says, I won't go without you, which was reflecting his fear, his lack of courage to go without her, to go. So, all right, she agreed. She said, I will go with you and 10,000 men, and we will draw out Sisera. We'll draw him out, make him come out to fight, bring his chariots and troops, and then we can defeat them. But she foretold to Barak, you will not gain glory from this expedition that you're setting out on because of your refusal, namely to go without me, Deborah. And she says, and so it is into a woman's power that the Lord is going to sell Sisera, which of course would be humiliating to Barak. So that's the root of the story. So this is set, the story is set near Mount Tabor, and where they meet up with Sisera. And indeed, Barak's army, led with Deborah present, is very successful. And Sisera is really scared, and he flees on foot. So Barak defeats his army, but he hasn't gotten the general. So Sisera goes to a tent where a man named Heber lives. He's called Heber the Canaanite, and he was on the side of the Canaanite king Jabin. So Sisera is hiding in his hiding near him, and this is the tent. In the tent of Heber is his wife Jael. So she treats him very well. She gives him milk to drink, and she covers him up with a rug and makes him very comfortable. So he can fall asleep. He's on safe territory. He's on Canaanite territory, and she makes him very comfortable, except that after he falls asleep, she takes a tent peg and a hammer, a mallet, and she drives it through his temple while he's sleeping. Now, try to think about if you're going to stage this, because it seems to me with the first pound, he would have woken up. So she must have had a pretty sharp tent peg. And she must have been very strong. And so he was unable to resist. You can imagine the kind of questions you can ask about this story. But anyway, so she kills him with the tent peg and the mallet. And when Barak finally reaches the tent of Jabin, the tent of Heber, she shows him Sisera's body. So a woman then has actually killed the general, and Barak is of course furious, and this humbles also Jabin, who's on the side of the Canaanites, and they eventually defeat him too. So it's a story of victory, story of a woman who took the situation into her own hands. And the interesting thing is, she did this for the Israelites, and she was not one of them. So you can imagine that biblical scholars have said, what was the point in this story? Why was she on the side of the Israelites? And what does that mean? So there's all kinds of theories. I think you could say, for one thing, she had decided the difference between who was just and who was unjust. She must have decided that God was on the side of Israel. And so she took matters into her own hands. Perhaps she was also mad at the Canaanite king. But I also have a theory, well, there's a couple theories, but I have a theory that she represents in the Hebrew Bible the earliest idea of what today we call the righteous Gentiles. The righteous Gentiles are those who want justice for everybody, including the Jewish people. So maybe she's sort of an incipient idea of this, one of the early ones you see, but we don't really know for sure. Okay, in Judges, there's a song of Deborah. This is a really old text. We can tell because the Hebrew is so archaic that maybe it dates to this actual period, the 1100s, 12th century BCE. But notice how it starts. Most blessed of women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. Actually, many people throughout the history have noticed this concept of most blessed of women. And that's interesting because we see it in the New Testament applied to the mother of Jesus, Mary. You are blessed of all women, that idea. So a very old idea that Christianity picks up on. Okay, the art, of course, focuses on the tent peg, as you can see, and the hammer. And here's Artemisia's version of this. And in particular, this has some relationship to the biography of Artemisia, probably, because scholars have art historians have noticed that this man is actually a portrait of her teacher, Tassi. And I put some of this here. Tassi, yes, he was her teacher, but he was also convicted of raping her. And so that it may not be just a coincidence that the face of Sisera is Tassi's face. If you notice on the base of the pilaster, she has written Artemisia Lomi Facibat 1620. Well, going back, you can see this. Okay, see it here? Okay, so that's how she signed it. She wanted it clearly known that she painted this. And there's a lot of literature about this, including some more late 20th, early 21st century feminist literature that points out she's furious. Okay, to put a tent peg in his skull is a way of our own reacting to his raping of her. Yeah, so Lomi, if you're curious, was just a family name she used at this time. Okay, let's look at this one also. Another one, this one's Amagoni, early 18th. Again, very clearly the mallet and the tent peg. So these are the attributes. Okay, so I only put in a few here of Jael and Sisera. There's lots of paintings of this that you can have a lot of fun checking out. All right, I got to pull it together because of the time. And I wanted to point out, okay, there's confusion among the paintings of the 4 women who behead men. And here are the issues. Who killed who? What happened with the heads? There are platters, usually signifying that it was Salomé and Herodias, but sometimes someone else. The weapons are shown, or in the case of Salomé and Herodias, they did not do the killing, so their head comes to them. And then there's always the question, were the woman killers heroic or evil? So the Salomé and Herodias function as evil killers, and Judith and Jael function as killers on behalf of Israel. So again, the clues or the attributes: the sword, hammer and tent peg, and servant, sometimes usually older, with a bag or a platter. Usually if the killer is female, we can tell who it is. If it's a dancing girl, such as the Timken Salomé, then we're more sure of that. Now, of course, many paintings are labeled either by the artist or by early possessors of the painting and so on, but still there is discussion sometimes. Okay, now I'm going to give you a final exam. So I'm going to show you paintings and you can tell me who they are. Okay, so Taylor, could you unmute everybody? You know, professors always give exams, so here's the final. Okay, so Taylor, could you unmute everybody, or everybody unmute yourself? Go ahead. Ready? Okay, so you know, who is this? Easy.
This is Deborah. Wait a minute.
So you can see tent peg, hammer.
Oh, that's Artemisia.
Well, Artemisia is the artist, and this is Jael killing Sisera.
Yeah, right, with the tent peg.
Yeah, so Artemisia is the artist. Okay, we know this one, we've looked at it so much, right? Salomé.
Salomé.
And the attributes are the platter, of course, the dance are the attributes of this painting. Okay. Attributes.
Sword.
Judith.
Servant with bag.
So it's Judith and Holofernes.
Right, Judith and Holofernes. Okay, this one we saw receiving the head on a platter. Has to be.
That has to be the first one.
Yeah, that has to be Salomé, right? Okay, this one we looked at this one too, for sure, Herodias, right? Yeah. Okay, I threw in some others now. I didn't give you much information. Okay, Look closely now. So what do you think?
Is that the old maid following her?
Yeah, with the head on her head, the decapitated head. She's got a sword.
So it has to be Judith.
It has to be Judith and Judith, yes.
Right.
Okay, here's another one. This one's easy. Tent peg.
The tent peg was the same.
Jael and Sisera. And here's another one.
Oh, the same one. Oh my God.
Tent peg, and right. So another Jael and Sisera. Now here's a good one.
Well, this is the sword with Judith and Holofernes in the bag.
Yeah, this has got to be Judith and Holofernes.
Right.
And
another tent peg.
Another tent peg, Sisera. Now what's this one?
Well, it looks like her hand is holding a sword.
That's right. That's the one thing that clinches it.
Yeah.
Because you could argue it's Salomé and Herodias, maybe, but the head's not on a platter.
And Salomé didn't do the job.
Right. And there's the sword. So we know this has to be Judith then.
Yeah.
Last one, another tent peg. And this one
Oh,
here, now this one's pretty interesting because the figure is made to look very huge, right? She's powerful. And yeah, there's the head going into
in
the
the back.
bags.
But look, the sword is broken. The end of the
Yes.
sword is broken off.
Yes, and you don't see the other end of it.
No.
So
And there's a foot. Ooh, that was very cool.
so we're at the end of the test there, and you did very well.
Florence,
Yes, go
I have
ahead.
a question. Do you know if Pontormo did anything like of this theme?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know the total history of these paintings because it's massive. You could
Yes.
specialize, I think, as an art historian if you wanted to in paintings of female femme fatales.
Thank you for your very extensive presentation. It was wonderful.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for chiming in here.
Yes, thank you, Florence, so much. So if anybody else has any questions or comments, you can either leave them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Florence directly. But I'd like to say thank you for everybody for joining today, and especially thank you to Florence for giving this wonderful lecture.
Okay, I just will take a look at the chat real fast here. I'm not sure why someone put in a chat about Henry VIII. Oh, I see. It was about the issue of incest. Okay, yes, that's interesting. Thank you for that comment. Whoever put that in, Laura, you put that in. Thank you. And so, okay, I guess we can stop there. Thank you, Taylor, and everyone else.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. Feel free to come back in next week for another guest lecture. But thank you so much, Florence. And we will see you all next Thursday. Have a good day, everybody.
Okay, bye now.